Storytelling requires a moral compass. But before I explain why, I want to apologize. I know I'm not at my desk. I am in my bedroom, sitting on my bed. This week I am prepping for homeschooling. This is my first year ever attempting homeschooling. Never thought I would be saying those words. But yeah, my desk is a mess and it's covered in school stuff right now as I'm trying to prep and get organized for all that. So I apologize. I don't have my good microphone in front of me. I don't have my desk, and I know the background doesn't look as nice. So I apologize for that. But today I still want to talk about storytelling and why morality matters. There are likely dozens of reasons why this is important, and who knows, this could become a series for all I know. But today I want to talk about there is a quote from Russell Crowe regarding Gladiator 1 and Gladiator 2, discussing why he believes that the first film succeeded and the second film failed. There's a lot of reasons I think that go into that, but I think he has some very good points to make. And as the actor who brought the first film to life, I think it gives him merit on this subject. So, first of all, though, I want to kind of frame some of my opinions, and then we will get to Russell Crowe's statement, and then he will kind of bring us home for today's conversation. But morality matters in fantasy and storytelling for a lot of reasons. But I think that one of the biggest reasons has to come down to basically the philosophy of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And that is that storytelling is produced from the human soul. And that's very important for morality in storytelling. And here's why. Tolkien and Lewis believed that because in every story that has ever been written, there is some kind of moral compass, and there is something in every story. There is some element of a happy ever after, of all things being made right, of good triumphing over evil. And as someone who hates horror movies and has never really, I think I've watched one horror movie and I hated it. It is my understanding that even horror movies have some form of good overcoming evil, or a happy ending, or at the very least, the villain is stopped. So all forms of storytelling have this underlying theme of good overcoming evil, of the darkness being banished and cast out by the light. And the reason that these threads of truth are woven through every single story is because there is an underlying truth in them. Because our world and our history, or his story, God's story, was written by truth himself, Jesus Christ. Because you see, within our very DNA, within every fiber of our being, we long for a world that is made right. And everyone goes about how to accomplish that differently. Some people think that you can achieve that through politics and certain policies. Some people think you can do that through nonprofit organizations and trying to help the world, like that. Others believe that you can do it through storytelling or through everyday ordinary acts. But the Bible tells us something different, that goodness is only achieved through Christ. And because Jesus Christ is the one who made this world, that same truth emanates from everything in it, even if it has been corrupted and twisted by man and by sin. We can still find pieces of the truth in everything. Now, this is why it matters for storytelling. It matters because if a story does not adhere to the moral compass that is within all of us, and some of us like to dampen that compass and we like to ignore it and try to tamper with the compass, but deep down we all know that there is right and wrong, and ultimately that is the conviction of the Holy Spirit. That is the evidence that there is morality, objective morality. We live in a day and age where people like to try to shift morality and redefine right and wrong and make it more subjective. But deep down, we all know that there is objective morality. And when your storytelling deviates from this truth, you are not only making a weaker story, but you are quite literally fighting against the nature of the universe within which we live, because it was created by truth. There is a truth that we all want a happy ever after. We all want a world with peace, with no more war, with no more death, no more sickness. Why is it that we can all long for these things? Well, C.S. Lewis has a great answer to that. C.S. Lewis says, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Basically, what Lewis is getting at is that if we all have these desires for a world with no more pain, no more war, no more sickness, no disease, those desires have to be there for a reason. And C.S. Lewis is was a very logical man. And in his mind, what that meant is that if every human desires these things, then that world has to exist somewhere. Because if we thirst, there is such a thing as water. If we hunger, there is such a thing as food. And so if we desire a world that is right, then there must be a world that is right out there somewhere. Now, from the Bible, we believe that that world is simply being in the presence of Jesus Christ. One day we will be united with him in heaven, but heaven ultimately is being within the presence of Jesus Christ. I do believe there is a physicality to it, because the Bible tells us that we will get new heavenly bodies, and so there is going to be some element of physically being there as well. All right, so now let me go ahead and pull up. I got my laptop here. I'm trying to do this with the wrong setup. But I want to look at a couple of Russell Crowe's statements regarding why he believes Gladiator 2 failed. And I think it is very telling, and I think it helps sum up this point very nicely. So first of all, Russell Crowe said that when we were shooting that film, Gladiator, there was a lot of pressure. The studio and the producers thought there should be sex between Maximus and the female characters. Russell Brand, I kept pushing back. This is the story of a man avenging the death of his wife and his child. There cannot be a moment in that journey where he stops and has sex with somebody. It doesn't make any sense because that destroys the journey. You see, what Russell Crowe understood, that many movies and shows do not nowadays, is that if you throw in depravity simply for the sake of depravity, you are dampening the story as a result. Russell Crowe understood that the entire motivation for Maximus in Gladiator was to avenge his wife and child. And so why on earth would you throw in a scene somewhere where he is having a very intimate relationship with another woman? Because that completely destroys his character. Adding that one simple scene, many people think it's just a love scene or whatever, but it actually dampens the character. And Russell Crowe, the man who probably understood the character better than anyone else, he understood that by adding that into the story, you'd be ruining the whole entire experience, and you'd be ruining his arc. And it's very possible that by simply adding that single scene, Gladiator may not have been remembered the same way. And also, as a brief mention, Lord of the Rings is actually often praised for not only how successful it was as a film series, but the fact that there was no sex or nudity, which is practically a staple in visual fantasy now, like TV or movies. And Lord of the Rings, despite not having that, still stands above all of them. And this, again, I think is a testament to the fact that when you abandon morality in your stories, you lose your audience. This is a bit of a hot take, and some people may even call it uninformed, but I have never watched Game of Thrones. For myself personally, I don't think that I should be watching it as a Christian. I haven't read it either. I do not think that George R. Martin has any understanding of morality. I think that his characters are completely depraved, and there is not much to learn from them. And my hot take is that I think Game of Thrones, you have to acknowledge and respect that it became very popular, about 10 or so years ago, as the shows were coming out. I don't think the Game of Thrones is going to age as well as Lord of the Rings. I think if you fast forward 10 years, these same number of people watching Lord of the Rings now will be watching Lord of the Rings then, if not more. I think the number of people watching Game of Thrones will have diminished. And people may not like to admit the reason why, but I think a big reason why that diminishing will happen will be because of the lack of morality within Game of Thrones. You have a series that is entirely built upon assassinating other people to get control of kingdoms. And George R.R. Martin seems to want to throw in as much gore, sex, and nudity and incest as he possibly can. And I think that those tools, if I could call them that very loosely, they sometimes can create the appearance of doing something edgy or astonishing, and you might get a brief high out of it. Something that makes you go, oh, like, wow, what was that? That was intense. And it might grab your attention for a short while, but it never ages as well. A great example with Game of Thrones, and yes, I have not read it or watched it, but I have heard a good amount through the grapevine over the years. But a great example with Game of Thrones is that Martin likes to kill off his characters very quickly and surprisingly and catch you off guard. That works the first time around, and it ages horribly the second time around, and the third, and the fourth, until eventually that death means nothing. Now compare that to something like Boromir in Lord of the Rings that people study repeatedly because of how impactful it was. And even Sean Bean in the movies, people study that scene, and many even call it the greatest death scene in all of cinema, because the death had an impact. It mattered. And what's funny with Martin is that he loves to critique Lord of the Rings, and he loves to critique the death of Gandalf and how he should have stayed dead, supposedly, in Martin's opinion. What I find hilarious about that is that Tolkien is the one who created fantasy, and Martin is writing on his coattails, and he always will. Martin will always live within the shadow of Tolkien, and I think that drives him insane. I really do. I think that Martin cannot handle that he has been unable to outshine Tolkien. From what I understand and I've heard, I do believe that Martin is a very good writer. I'm not trying to critique him in that regard, but I think that if Martin's world had morality in it, then his stories might have had a lot more staying power. But his world of Westeros does not have morality in it because I don't believe that Martin has much morality in him. And I know that's a strong claim to make. And I'm not trying to say that out of judgment or out of hate. Much of our world today doesn't have a moral compass. There's plenty of Christians that don't have a moral compass right now. Probably the vast majority of Christians, sadly. We don't base our lives on any kind of objective morality anymore. We all just do what we want, and then we even try to make God fit within our own box and within our own moral compass. That's not how morality works. And when you take that away from storytelling, you are losing the effectiveness of storytelling itself. You see, Jesus Christ used storytelling all the time. We call them parables, but they are essentially short stories. Jesus was a phenomenal short story writer, but all of his stories had the completeness of truth in it because he understood storytelling more than anyone else. You know, a great example is the story of the prodigal son. And you have this son who is wanting to basically mooch off his father. Give me your inheritance. I don't want to wait for you to die. It's all about me. Give me what I want. And the son takes this inheritance, goes off and squanders it. And basically, once he hits rock bottom, he comes back to his father, and the father welcomes him with open arms. There is morality in that. There is right and wrong. And the only reason that the prodigal son story sticks with us is because there's morality in it. And that's how all storytelling is. The stories that you love the most all have morality in them. And if you've watched any of my videos so far, you probably, you'll hear me mention things like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Narnia a lot. And there's a reason. There's a reason these stories are some of the biggest franchises of all time. And there's a reason that they try to keep remaking these stories and try to capture that magic. The problem is that they always fail because they're not They're not trying to look at morality as the reasoning for making these movies. They either want to push an agenda or make money, or maybe most optimistically, the studios just don't want to take a chance on a new story. That's probably the most optimistic take that you could make. Really quick on the subject of storytelling, I want to really quickly tell a story about my wife and I about a year or so ago. When the show Reacher had come out, my wife and I started watching it. And I remember, I believe, like within the first episode or two, there was a full-on nude male who had been, very grotesquely murdered. And so they're investigating the crime scene, but they're showing you all the detail. And it was stuff that my wife and I were like, man, like, do we need to be seeing this? Does this really add to the story, or is it just a shock value? Because we don't feel like it added anything to the story. And then we got another episode or two into it, and sure enough, our main character, who supposedly is a Christian in real life, has a sex scene with this woman on camera, and she shows everything. And my wife and I are like, oh my goodness, what is this? And so we turn off the show, and we're done with it, and we haven't watched it since. And I bring that up because there are things in storytelling that are uncomfortable, and there are realities that we shouldn't shy away from. I'm not telling people to shy away from the realities of death and war and evil, but people like Tolkien saw far more evil in the world than most of us ever will. Tolkien was on the front lines of World War I, fighting a regime that wanted to conquer the world because they were the superior race. Tolkien saw evil up front. He saw the trench warfare. He saw the gas and the fire and the bombs and the gunfire. Tolkien saw more evil than most of us ever will. And yet, if you look at his story in Lord of the Rings, you will not find nearly anything that you will find in modern TV shows, modern storytelling, modern fantasy. And the reason for that is because certain things are not meant to be glorified. We are to acknowledge evil. We are to call it out. We are to expose the darkness. But that doesn't mean that we have to show all of the darkness. Because sometimes people can become attracted to darkness. And sometimes, I don't think people quite realize it, but certain things like horror movies, from what I understand, is sort of like a drug. That you go into a scary movie, and you get that first jump scare or that shock value of the super gory scene, and you leave the theater traumatized with some adrenaline and just these very intense feelings. And a lot of people will feel like that they can never recapture their first horror movie, that they can never get that same high again. The problem is that you are playing with human emotions and human morality, and that you are engaging in something in such a way that it is like a drug. It's like an addiction, that you're trying to get more of the darkness, but the darkness never satisfies you. And that's because only the light satisfies you. I personally really wish that we had numbers on how many times Lord of the Rings is rewatched every year, because I would be willing to bet that Lord of the Rings is probably one of the top, if not the top, most rewatched film series of all time. And the reason for that is that it is one of the greatest fictional stories ever told, and that's because it is completely full and overflowing with morality. And to you, dear viewer who's watching this, I bring all of this up because morality matters in your life too. Because the most important story is not Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or any of our favorite things. It is your story. And it is whether or not your story is intertwined with the story of Jesus Christ, the true story. And so as we close today, I ask that if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, that you would take the time to get to know him, to let him into your life, and to let your story be intertwined with his. Our Heavenly Father is writing the greatest story ever told, and he is allowing you and I to partake in it by simply allowing him to enter into our own lives, by surrendering our own penmanship up to him, by letting him be the author of our story, because he knows how to write a good and proper and perfect ending. And so I hope that today you will take the time to get to know him. All right, my friend, until next time, please take care. God bless. We'll see you soon. Adios.